Hi, this is Meg Riley in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you've joined us for an episode of The VUU. This week we'll be talking about changing in the formation process for Unitarian Universalist ministers, and we have David Pettee. David, what's your exact title there?
It's Ministerial Credentialing Director.
Whoa, Minister Credentialing Director is joining us. And Bob LaValle here from Buffalo, New York, and some of our regulars seem to be a few minutes late, but we're hoping they will arrive. Traffic jams on the internet superhighway, I think. I'm not sure. At any rate, great to see you all. So what's going on where you are, Bob?
Well, it's a chilly day in Buffalo, but the sun is shining, and it's Board of Education election season in Western New York. So there's a lot of a variety of communities that are grappling with a lot of the realities of education today. One interesting community is a town called Lancaster that recently, the board recently voted to eliminate their mascot, the Redskins.
Oh, that's good.
Which was incredibly, the resistance was unbelievable. And a couple of board members lost their positions over it.
Wow.
And a couple of new board members are folks who had supported the old racist mascot. So a little bit of a sign of the times, you know. And in Buffalo, the Buffalo Board of Ed didn't have an election, but they are. This is a chronically failing district. They've gone through something like 3 or 4 superintendents in the past 5 years. I mean, that is the absolute symbol of a failed district. And they're grappling or wrestling with the idea of moving to mayoral control, where they'll have a mayorally appointed board and hopefully some opportunities for continuity and stability. Because right now, I've done a lot of work in ed reform, and Buffalo stands out as a dysfunctional city in ed reform. So,
wow,
exciting times.
Stand out as dysfunctional in a place where so many. I've actually decided education is going to be my number one issue in the 2016 presidential election, because I think this privatization of education thing that's coming is terrifying. Mm-hmm. And I've actually got a friend staying here from Greece who runs an online high school, who says that the big online high schools are they're in cahoots with the textbook companies, and so they have a student-teacher ratio, something like 300 to 1. And it's all about teaching to the test, and so that it's all one, the large corporations. So I read an article that said that what happened to healthcare, once it privatized, is what could happen to education. And that just woke me up, and I thought, no, not what happened to healthcare here. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Jeb Bush is certainly pro-privatization. That's one of his big issues. I mean, it's a mess. Honestly, if I were on a school board, Minneapolis is a big mess. I don't know what I'd do. I mean, there are no easy answers, that's for sure.
Well, I've actually, I was there at the beginning of the charter school movement. I worked in a charter school in Massachusetts, City on a Hill, back in 1996, which was, that was the first round of charters in Massachusetts. So that makes me an old timer in this movement. Mm-hmm. And we had all kinds of optimism about what charters would do, but the reality is we're just emerging with a parallel system of equally mediocre schools. And
well, there are standouts, let's just say. I mean, charter schools started in Minnesota, and they were started by teachers who were sick of all the bureaucracy. Hey, Joanna, we're talking about education at the minute. And so they were started by teachers who were sick of bureaucracy, and my kid is graduating from a school where it's a teachers co-op, and the teachers, there are no administrators. The teachers divvy up. And the teachers are very happy, and it's a very good school. Well, it's been great for GIA, I'll say that. There are some real slackers there, but I guess that's true everywhere. But it's kind of like homeschooling, except I don't have to do anything, because they help the kid. They just say, here are the standards that the state wants you to meet. We'll help you meet them any way you want. And so you can do internships, you can do projects. If you want to take classes, you can. We'll have classes for people who want them. It's a hippie school, but it works really well. But I know that when you look at charter schools, some of them are terrible. And some of them are really racist, and some of them are closets for religion, and blah, blah, blah. Hey, Joanna, what's new there?
Oh, just got back from the eye doctor. I'm going to have to join the land of bifocals or Verilux or whatever it is you grown-ups wear.
Progressives.
Progressives, yeah.
Omnifocals, that's what I've got.
Yeah.
Omnifocals, all right.
I went from nothing to omnifocals.
Omni? This sounds like an octopus version of what do you have, like 8 different lenses?
Something like that. Yeah, they're really expensive too.
Well, it had gotten to the point on Sundays we do, we project lyrics and whatnot, and so at the back of the sanctuary they have a flat screen up for those of us who are, up on the chancel, and so I was squinting down at my notes and squinting at that. So I'm ready to not squint anymore.
I remember when I knew I needed glasses, I was in the Washington office. I just turned 40, so probably that's what you're facing. But because they say that's when your eyes just plummet. But anyway, I got this business card, and I took it in the Washington office. We were in a staff meeting. I said, look at this ridiculous business card. I threw it down, and I said, who could read this? And Rob Keithan, who was like 25, picked it up and went, I can read it. And everybody passed it around, everyone went, I can read it. And it comes back to me, and I'm like, I need to go to the eye doctor, don't I?
When you start, asking your kids to read things, boy, nothing will make you feel older there.
Well, you can get some hip omnifocals these days.
Okay, good. So this is really funny. So I just asked the, lady at the desk, they were giving me my prescription, and I said, okay, now does this have all the information so that I can order glasses online? And she goes, and this was actually a young woman, and she goes, oh, online? I don't think you can do that. And I was like, no, really, it's a thing.
The internet. That's really funny. Yeah, they're a lot cheaper online. David, how about you? How are your eyes?
My eyes are, just like you, Meg, I hit 42 and I went from 0 to 70.
Yeah.
From no glasses to progressives.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's what I had then, yeah, progressives. Now I'm to the omnifocals.
They're continuing to slowly deteriorate, so.
Yeah. There we are. We are.
That's right.
Well, so today we're talking about the changes in ministerial formation, and Bob was saying before you came, Joanna, and before we were on the air, that he and I are the bookends here, because I've been around forever, and he's just coming in, and you're kind of like somewhere in the middle there. So we probably have all had completely different experiences, as this is. I think, David, you and I came through about the same time, so we probably had about the same experience. But it's changed many, many times, this process. So why don't you start by telling us about where these ideas came from and who's on first? Kind of just orient us a little bit with all this.
In terms of the changes that have taken place?
Yeah, it seems like some of them are coming from the MFC and some of them are coming from the UUA, and it's just, kind of give us the lay of the land here.
So, let's see. I'll try to do this in a concise manner. The RSCCs have been around since 1999, and were created in the late 1990s to want to give seminarians an early and direct conversation with denominational folks, ministers, lay people, believing that having that opportunity to get that kind of counsel would be helpful in terms of their formation. There was a built-in dimension of the RSCCs being empowered under rare circumstances to essentially stop someone's formation, which happened quite rarely over the last 15 years. At the same time that the evaluative part of the RSCCs were created, there was hopes for what were called advisory groups, which were meant to be some combination of ministers and lay people in districts that folks who are aspirants would be in touch with.
Hey, David, hold on. Are you breaking up for other people? Are other people getting breakup? Try turning down your, you can dial down your bandwidth usage.
I'm not sure how to do it.
If you go up by where you mute yourself, and you see those 4 bars,
yes,
you can click on that and just move it to medium or.
Okay.
And that will probably Because the important thing is people want to hear you. Some folks actually download the VUU as a podcast and then
They
listen to
can't
it in
read
the
your
car or
lips.
at the gym. So
Okay.
So, and I was going to say, I was part of that part that never came to fruition of, oh, he disappeared. But I know he's there because his
I'm
name,
here.
there he is. I was part of that in-care thing that we were assigned as mentors to seminarians.
Right.
And I had 2 students, both of whom I talked out of seminary. I should have. One of my proud won't go on your resume accomplishments.
that's a blessing, though. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
as a guy, for folks who are watching, my full disclosure is I'm just starting my 3rd year at Meadville Lombard. I'm going full time, and I have an appointment with the MFC for the fall of 2016.
Right.
So I'm in the process.
Yes, you are.
But yeah, but there are. I mean, like everyone who's gotten to seminary and made it through would probably admit that there are folks for whom this is exploratory, and maybe the best thing for them is to find their ministry in a different path. And before they spend 3 years and $50,000, I think it's a blessing to let them know.
Well, I mean, one of the people I mentored said she was going to seminary as an activist because she was lonely and she thought she'd be less lonely. And I said, hello, that is not going to help you with the loneliness. You will actually lose your congregation. So I think maybe that's not going to help. You know, like just hearing why people go, as you said, Bob, I think sometimes if we had a strong lay leadership program, some people who are in seminary would do something different.
Right, right. So sort of carrying on with this quick story, the evaluative part of the RSCCs carried forth through the first decade of the 21st century. And with the collapse of the economy in 2008, 2009, that had a very serious impact upon the RSCCs, which at one point were 6, with administrative staff for support. And when all the dust had cleared, there were 4 left. There were 2 left, meeting twice a year, and I became, for all intents and purposes, the only staff person, other than some folks in the office who helped with some logistical stuff. So that's been sort of the way it has been the last 6 years. And the loss of the regional dimension of the regional subcommittees, I think, was beginning to become a frustration for people. I know folks from the great state of Minnesota who had to decide whether they wanted to go to Boston or Portland, Oregon, and realizing either way with hotels and flights and ground transportation, it was going to cost $1,000. So there was some energy around the system as a result of the way these changes had taken place. So bringing things up to the more current state of affairs, every April the UUA administration is responsible to put a budget together for the next fiscal year. And looking at the changes in income that have taken place in terms of money not coming in the way that folks had hoped for, along with the results of a survey which I did back in January, reaching out to aspirants and candidates and newly preliminary fellowship ministers. The combination of those 2 things led to the decision on the part of the administration to recommend to the board that the RSCCs no longer be funded. And
okay, let's pause here because there are more changes too, but let's talk about this one for a little bit.
Okay.
Bob, you've seen the RSCC, obviously, and Joanna, you did. I mean, it didn't exist when I came through. So I'm really curious for both of you, you know, what it was like, what the pros and cons. I mean, it's done. This isn't to rethink it. I just think for people to know perspectives. I mean, I never did it, so.
So I saw, gosh, I can't think of what year it was, but several years ago, I saw it in San Francisco, and at that time, and I appreciate this, they were very clear about we are a gatekeeping function. You know, there was no confusion about that, and so I appreciated that. Now, if someone tells me something is a gatekeeping function, that is going to affect how I interact with it. And in fact, you know, I had the only kind of criticism that I had in my letter, because they give you a letter afterwards, was you didn't really tell us much about your weaknesses. Well, yes, if you tell me you're a gatekeeping function, I'm not going to tell you much about my, you know, so I think that there's kind of inherent in it, there were already these issues. But for me, overall, I found it, I don't know that I would say that I found it helpful, but was it for someone, I hate to say for someone like me, but for someone like me who had a fairly easy time going through, was it really for me? You know, or was it for the people where you go, ooh, I think you need to reconsider this. But the problem is you can't know who those people are unless they, you know, so I you know, overall for me it was fine. It cost money, but it was fine.
I think it's helpful to think of it where it lies in over the course of your seminary career too. Before, so these kind of evaluations actually begin with the career assessment, which people should do like right as they're starting seminary, even perhaps before. I did my career assessment I think it was July or August before I started seminary in Charlotte. And you know, career assessment is a little bit of a euphemism. It's actually a 2-day-long psych eval, and you use a lot of different survey instruments. Then you meet with a psychiatrist or or a psychologist who walks through the results with you and explores all the things that happen. And it's a really for folks who haven't done a lot of therapy or just haven't had a chance to check in like that in a while, it's really, I think, a really productive use of time. And
I've described it as really intense head shrinking.
Yeah, well, it's 2 days straight, and it's not a gatekeeping function necessarily, but folks.
It's not? Like, what if you bombed it?
If you bombed it, they suggest, you know, I know someone who was told maybe this is not for you, maybe the ministry is not for you in this form, and they went ahead and stayed in seminary and stayed on the path, but. So it's information, but it's not, and you know, and it goes in your permanent file. So your permanent record, David is nodding. So
Right.
it's a point of reference going forward. The interesting thing about mine was I actually they had sort of I flagged as a little bit angry, but I had also just returned from a year in Afghanistan, so I think I was right where I needed to be. So.
But David, I'm curious. I've never actually heard the psych eval, the career assessment held up. Is that part of the thinking? Is that part of what you were looking at too, as the one of the places where people early on get feedback? Because when I've heard people upset about the RSCC eliminated, it's about the early on assessment piece.
Yeah. I mean, I think the career assessment is, as Bob and Joanne described it, it's kind of a combination of let's take stock of your sense of call to ministry. How do you temperamentally? How do you characteristically? How does this all work with ministry as a profession among the thousands and thousands of people who have gone before you? And there are dimensions to it that sort of measure your psychological abilities and capacities and willingness to accept criticism and self-awareness and growing edges. So it actually kind of serves both purposes. I always have tried to urge people not to go in feeling defended or to be defensive, because that's what shows up in the report. So it seems counterintuitive. And to the extent that folks can take it as a really interesting learning opportunity, the vast majority of people get the report and they say, oh yes, this is familiar to me. I've seen this part of myself before. And then hopefully the recommendations that come out are going to help people become clearer and stronger as a minister and more grounded and all that good stuff.
Hey, Tom Shade, welcome.
Hey, hi, how are you?
Good.
I had a little time zone problem.
Oh, that happens, yeah.
Anyways, very quickly, my experience at the RSCC, I was at the old headquarters. I went through fine, absolutely fine too. But I was really grateful for it because it was, in the whirling vortex that is seminary. It was great to have a moment out of that time where I stopped and said, I'm on this path. It's still going well. I had to articulate my answers to the big questions, the people who were very smart and also very kind. And there was a certain, as I was waiting in the waiting room to hear the results, because they tell you immediately afterwards or like 15 minutes afterwards, there was a beautiful sort of pregnancy to that moment about like, here's, another, the seed of my ministry is starting to open. And so I was grateful for the process, and I enjoyed it.
You know, I have to say, but because I had a good experience with the career assessment too, that there is a value in the for me there was a value in these different steps of, like, with the career assessment going, yes, you do know yourself, you know, because there was, you know, there's always kind of, or at least for me, kind of that question in the back of my mind, you know, like the Johari window. There's the one window of the things you don't know about yourself that others do. Of, okay, do I really know myself? And, you know, the career assessment, the RSCC, and ultimately the MFC said, yeah, you know, you've done your work, you know yourself. And you know, I don't know. For me, I think that's probably one of the most important things about being a minister.
Yeah. I didn't go through the process myself because I was long into the process before they came into being. But being a Star King student back in the 1980s, there was an opportunity every semester to meet with the core faculty, which was a pretty important conversation that a lot of big questions were raised, and so the notion of an in-care system didn't seem all that unfamiliar to me when it came into place in the late 90s.
Yeah, I went to a non-UU seminary, and I think there were maybe 6 of us here at United Theological Seminary, and the local ministers didn't seem all that interested, though we were invited to collegial meetings. But I think the kind of in-care system that's being talked about would have been really useful. And I know that a lot has happened since then. I know that there are people now at the seminary making sure that classes are there in a structured kind of way. But so the RSCC is not there as a step now. So we had totally interrupted you, which is what we do here. But go on. Go on, I dare you. No. So, Tom, I had asked David just to kind of set the context and lay out who the players are in some of these decisions and just kind of start us, and then we immediately interrupted him. So.
Okay, well, you know, I never went to the RSCC because that was before my time, just before my time, but... you know.
It appears we are now after your time, Tom. Can you dial down your bandwidth, because you just faded out? Sigh. Welcome to live TV. Google on the air.
There it is.
All right, try again.
Well, it was before my time, and now, you know, so the in-care system I had was the colleagues down in the Texas cluster, which they were very kind to me, very good to me, and that was very useful. But you know, I would have been nice to have a little bit broader view. I remember liking the psychological assessment when I went to the MFC. I thought that was a useful thing. I learned some things about myself. You know, maybe you're not supposed to learn something about yourself. Maybe you're supposed to already know yourself, right? Oh.
I remember that at
that's who this guy is.
At the career assessment, they had you take an IQ test, and I did this whole like race class analysis of the IQ test, and they were like, "Yep, you all right," you know. And then I was telling this guy all the things about UUism that bugged me, you know, going on, and he said, "Have you ever thought of leaving?" And I said, "Leaving? No. What do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, I forgot. This is part of your culture. This is what you guys do." You know, I was like ragging on everything that's wrong about us. Yeah, that's how we love each other here.
Well, should we talk about in care, or move to talk about the? We interrupted David, so
no. This was a good transition point. With the loss of the RSCC system, which is now has occurred, the big question becomes what happens now. There are a number of people who were quite delighted to hear that the RSCCs had gone away, but I would say an equal number of people saying, I wouldn't say I was looking forward to it, but I feel like I'm going to miss something important. So
never fails, right, David?
Yeah, right. So this notion of in-care is not a new thing. There have been 6 independent kind of pilot projects going on for the last 3 or 4 years around the country. We've been sort of testing, the panel on theological education has funded some in-care sites in the Mountain Desert District in Iliff, Metro New York with Union and Drew, Joseph Priestley District in Wesley. There's been a it's been in a quiet phase lately, but in Prairie Star and United Theological Seminary, the Pacific Southwest District in Claremont, and here in the middle of the heartland of St. Louis, Eden Seminary has had a program the past few years. So back in March, representatives from all these in-care groups came together to share their best practices. And since I had some awareness that the regional subcommittee on candidacy system was very fragile financially because of conversations I was privy to, I urged the people there to think about what are we going to try to do to enhance in-care as more of having more of a continentally based arc as opposed to 5 or 6 kind of isolated, barely connected kind of entities. And that seemed to resonate with all the people who were there. And we came out of that meeting in March with another proposal to the panel on theological education to fund essentially a strategic planning process, which the panel has agreed to do. And over the course of the summer, a whole bunch of stakeholder groups are going to be contacted about this. A draft plan will be put together, and then a larger meeting of folks will be gathering in late October to say, well, what do you think? How do we make this work? What are the obstacles? How do we finance this? To begin seriously sort of trying to find a way to create a little bit of an infrastructure at the same time that the local ways in which these programs have developed is also respected, because there are very distinct cultural manifestations around in-care that what works in Minneapolis is probably not going to work in Boston and vice versa. So trying to find a way to maintain some connections on a national level, but letting the local groups really figure out how it is they're going to work.
What are some of the best practices that came up?
I think best practices were related to trying to determine with students up front what it is they were actually looking for. There's really a temptation for those of us who have been serving in the craft for a while to imagine what we think people know and what they need to know. And instead, I think there's been a real conscientious effort to check in with folks to try to get a sense of what would work for them. To the extent that our congregations can play an active role in care is a critical learning. With the programs that have been most well established, particularly in the Mountain Desert District, local colleagues have been very successful in terms of finding ways to engage the local congregations in the Mountain Desert District to actually begin to understand that they actually share some of the responsibility to raise our future leaders. This is not something that seminaries and the fellowship committee should have the responsibility to take care of.
So what happens in these in-care systems? What actually happens?
There are often mentors that are appointed for individual students. The local ministers' chapters, in some cases, will either designate someone to be a representative to meet with folks. There are weekend or Saturday morning seminars related to some of the gifts and skills and duties of ministry that are not typically part of theological education.
Like
learning about financial issues is not something that gets taught in seminary. How do you supervise staff?
Yeah.
Those are kinds of issues that don't get talked about. It's sort of the reality most of us face when we get out of seminary, went to work, and the first year was, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I didn't learn any of this stuff. So it's sort of trying to fill in some of those gaps.
Okay. Right.
And I think actually more importantly to find ways to positively connect people to Unitarian Universalism in a way that too evaluative interviews don't. While the interviews may be helpful, I think for a lot of folks, as some woman said to me, which I thought really captured it well, I was evaluated the day I applied to seminary. I was evaluated in my field education. I was evaluated in my career assessment. I get evaluated in CPE, internship, and the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. Is there any place for support for me in this journey to become a minister? And that really resonated with me. So it's filling in some of the cracks that have existed for a long time. One of the things that I'm going to be asking this small group that's putting this report together is to survey students again, to ask them once again, what is it you want? What do you need? What are we missing here? So we can begin to build a system around the people who are currently going to be affected by it, as opposed to all us smart people deciding on their behalf.
You know, for the last 3 months, I've been doing a twice a month online covenant group for seminarians, and they have expressed exactly that. Like, here's a place I get to just come and be with people and not be evaluated. I have absolutely no role with these folks evaluatively, and then mostly I'm just facilitating them listening to each other. But it's amazing. They're wonderful, and I thought, yeah, I guess now that you mention it, I didn't have this anywhere through that whole process.
Right.
So.
David, I'm curious, how much has this new thing that Meadville is doing, where you basically you start seminary and you have an internship of sorts, how much has that affected the thinking around what's going to happen, you know, with this, with the MFC process?
Well, I mean, I want to try to make a distinction. I think the in-care system is not something that is under the what's the word? It's not under the management of the fellowship committee, because to that extent that people somehow think that whatever's going on in these conversations is somehow going to end up as part of an evaluation. There's not. That's not what this is about. Meadville Lombard, in terms of their touchpoint program that's in place, I think has been successful in terms of connecting people with congregations and ministers pretty effectively from the very beginning. But what we've begun to see in these 6 in-care sites, given that most Meadville Lombard students are not living in Chicago, is that when the folks in Mountain Desert say we're going to have a retreat, or the folks in Claremont say we're going up to DeBenneville Pines, they're finding Meadville and Starr King students that want to come along, that want the face-to-face opportunity to spend time with people more than just the intensives.
That's right. Well, I can say, so Meadville, if you're a full-time student at Meadville, you have a teaching pastor all 3 years because you're taking these signature classes that there's one each class. But if you're going any slower than doing it straight through in 3 years, which is a lot of folks, then there are years where you don't have a teaching pastor because you're not taking the signature class, which means that you're disconnected from that experience of VUU clergy collegial culture. That's a great alliteration there, but which is such an important part of the education. The fact that I get to talk to Meg all the time, work in a congregation, and watch her do her thing is a huge part of my education. So, I just want to second, David, to what you said. The idea that there's a lot of evaluation and not enough support. I think you're right. I think the balance should be more in terms of support. So I think you guys are really onto something there.
It was very clear in the survey which I conducted back in January that every single group that we contacted all said we have to develop an in-care system. And that included members of the RSCC themselves, ministers, candidates, the folks we contacted in theological schools. It was really clear. And I think this might be, in some ways, is being impacted by the number of people who no longer go to seminary in the traditional sense of the word, the way that Meg and Tom and I did, where you just went to seminary. That was it. There were no other options. And I think increasingly, because of long-distance learning and that sort of thing, there are folks that are really wanting to have more connection in a way that when you're full-time in a seminary 20, 30 years ago, you had more than you ever wanted and needed. But trying to fill some of those gaps, I think, is another way in which this has become incredibly important.
Yeah, it really is, and especially as someone who did not go to a UU seminary, until I became, I got really lucky because I had contacts through blogging, and they kind of became my in-care, thing. But that was, how many? Number one, the blogging world doesn't, it really exists anymore. And so for me, I really didn't have that until I became a candidate. And so I just felt like I was kind of all on my own. And I'm sure there were some benefits of that, but I would have preferred to have a little, in care.
Right. I mean, you had the experience of having some connections within Unitarian Universalism.
Right.
There are many people whom are the only UU student in their seminary.
I was, yeah.
Who might be have been member of a congregation for a year or two. In some cases, in fellowships that have no ministers. Understanding of ministry as a craft is probably
David, we're losing your bandwidth. You might need to dial down one more step.
Okay.
Not really.
Shall I keep going?
Oh, that's better now. That's
okay.
Better.
Okay.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Watching this as a Meadville student, so I'm obviously hugely biased. But so the in-care programs that are functioning now seem to be centered on non-UU identity schools, and so the two UU identity schools, Starr King and Meadville, who have students everywhere. I think they're wondering how to connect, or if this program is going to roll towards them. I'm in Western New York. There's nothing in hundreds of miles of me that from the in-care program. So I mean, what's the thinking about going to scale with that and everybody everywhere?
That's actually the biggest part of trying to that's the biggest knot we have to find a way to unravel. Representatives from both Starr King and Meadville Lombard want to be part of this process as they kind of think through their particular pedagogies and the ways in which their students are being educated to try to figure out how to make this work. I think I told that this week I had 2 conference calls with FUEs, with the folks at Starr King, talking with people around the country late on Monday night about the process and about some of the changes. So I sort of anticipate doing more and more of that. But I think that part of this system is trying to think even broader than what you've described. I was in Canada this past weekend with the CUC meeting and met about half of the people who are currently preparing for ministry. There are about 10 people in all of Canada, and they are far aflung. How are we going to figure out a way for those folks to feel like they have some interstitial tissue, that they have some connection, some people that they can talk to? And that partly will be a conversation between the CUC and the UU Ministers of Canada and this group at large to try to figure out how that's going to work. So the details are in the devil is in the details around this stuff.
And is the UUMA taking a role in this?
Yes. Yeah. Don Southworth was present for our conversation in March, and will be part of conversations moving forward as well. So I realize this whole conversation has created some anxiety for colleagues who wonder in districts around the country how this is going to work. And I am wanting people to have some faith in our process. We are not jumping into something that we know nothing about, given that we have more than 4 years of experience with differing locations, and they're all effective, and people appreciate them a great deal. So I have significant confidence that we're going to find a way to be able to kind of work with everybody around this. It may not roll out as quickly as folks want, but we're moving as quickly as we can.
So is there any advice or encouragement that you would give to ministerial clusters? Like I'm in Austin, and we have some seminarians who are in process in our area. Any advice that you'd give to us about right now, what are things that we can be doing?
Well, I'm slightly hesitant to do that only because I think that's part of the challenge of this larger conversation. I know that some UUMA chapters have chosen to identify someone within leadership whose responsibility it is to reach out to the various folks within the area that the chapter region is. just so folks know that who they are, and to try to develop some sense of what kind of needs people have. It can be a bit frustrating. There are aspirants and candidates whom seem to be somewhat content not to be connected with other people, or they're intimidated by a minister calling saying, "How can I be helpful to you?" It's all that stuff. So that's one way in which I really think it's important that the individual students themselves have as much say in what gets created and what they need. So differing chapters are kind of handling it differently. Some of them are relying upon the UU ministers that have relationships with seminaries to kind of lead that conversation. So it's being done in a lot of different kinds of ways. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a little bit more direct counsel and suggestion and feedback with the UUA and the UUMA once we get into some of the details of this in the fall.
Great. Hey, let's talk about the MFC. So, David, what's up with the reading list?
The reading list. Well, the reading list.
Seminarians want to know.
Yeah, I know they do. So the reading list is connected with the ongoing changes in the ministerial competencies, which has been a 2-year conversation that was been based on fulfilling the call. At the last meeting of the MFC, which was in April, the committee more or less kind of approved for themselves a final draft of this, and there will be conversations at General Assembly saying this is what it is that we're working with. And the MFC is in a very interesting place right now in that there are 14 people and 6 of them are terming off. So when the MFC regathers in September or October, there will be 6 new people and a new chair.
And let's just take a moment to appreciate Wayne Arneson.
No kidding.
His service has been extraordinary.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
hats off, and everybody who runs into Wayne, you should be thanking him.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So to your point, Bob, there have been 2 people who've been hired by the fellowship committee to update the reading list based upon these particular competencies, feeling with some confidence that these competencies that they've rolled together are not probably going to change significantly. So that process is underway.
Who are those 2 folks?
They would be Sophia Betancourt and Dan McCannon.
Dan McCannon and Sophia Betancourt. Great.
Yep.
PhD types.
That's
Very
right.
smart people.
They are smart people.
So what's the conversation at GA going to be? Is it something that happens like in the general sessions, or is it a panel, or?
My guess is that the MFC typically requests some meeting time, which has to go through the GA Planning Committee, and this is going to be the subject of that conversation. Normally they do sort of a mock panel and answer questions, but I think this is going to be the focus of that conversation. And I'm expecting there'll be something at Ministry Days as well.
So also there's this travel equalization thing with the MFC. Can you explain how that works?
Sure. I can tell you what I know so far. So this has long been not a complaint, but a request from people who do not live in Boston, who need to travel to the Fellowship Committee. It was reiterated strongly again in the survey, which I did back in January. And so I think the committee realized that there were 2 situations they were trying to address with this application fee. Which, in looking around at other professions, is not a particularly extraordinary thing. So the committee voted to create a $250 travel equalization fund / application fee, of which that money will be collected over this fiscal year, and then we're going to have to figure out a process between now and September of 2016, when there's actually some money available, to begin figuring out how to determine how people request it and to try to make it as fair for all the people who need to travel from outside Boston. The other issue that the committee was hoping to be able to address with this is a rather chronic problem of candidates canceling their interviews late in the game. And this may seem insignificant, except that I believe for the last, if I'm not mistaken, last 6 years, every single MFC meeting, which would be 18 consecutive meetings at least, they have not had a full panel.
That's so sad, given that
people cancel.
People cancel for a variety of reasons. There are, legitimate. I just had surgery. I have a dying family member. There are also people who say, I'm not sure I want to do this. I can't get my paper together in time. A whole variety of reasons. The MFC tried last year to address this problem by adding 12 interviews, which is a hard thing to do because it involves folks coming in additional days, and when all was said and all was done, 9 of those 12 canceled. So there is some hope, maybe, that people realize making an interview request with the MFC is actually a really significant event, and it has an enormous impact upon the people who don't get to interview, and there's a fiscal reality for the association as well when interviews get canceled. So I'm crossing my fingers that this will hopefully try to cut down on some of that, because we've lost nearly 25 interviews, which means the waiting list is now 18 months. It would have been a year. So we're getting closer, but it's a chronic problem for people who want to see the fellowship committee.
Well, especially if people cancel late, because if you're on the waiting list but you don't hear till 2 weeks before, that's not going to help you too much.
Right. Well, I also wonder if because it's such a you have to go so far out now that people, I have no idea what I'm doing in the fall of 2016, and so I'm hoping that the stars will align and I'll be able to show up. But
I hope so too.
That's like geological time for me, though. Seriously. So, hey, I have a request from the audience.
Sure.
Elizabeth Buki
Yes.
is wondering if the fellowship committee is looking at models in our mainline denominational sisters. So are we looking outside of the denomination for best practices or ideas about how to do credentialing?
There have been conversations with our contemporaries in the UCC, and to some extent within the Methodist tradition, beginning to move a little further afoot. The polities are so incredibly different, and the size of differing mainstream denominations are so different. Things don't transfer quite as well. I'm part of conversations every year with essentially my counterpart at the UCC out of Cleveland to begin to get a sense of how they do this. It was interesting for me to learn, particularly around in-care, that according to the woman I spoke with who oversees the Massachusetts conference of UCC clergy, that there really is an incredibly strong cultural expectation among ministers, among UCC ministers, that they're going to devote time to in-care. Everyone does it. It's just the way it is. And I suspect that may have been in place for a long time. And hopefully, probably not in my lifetime, that will become part of something that you do, that you understand that's part of carrying forth the responsibility of being.
Isn't the UCC model, it's really conference-based, right? So not
it's very
national. But I would think that the relationships in particular areas, would be challenging with all the mobility of a lot of people who don't stay in the same area and have built relationships one place and then
that's right.
move and have to start over. But also, if you don't move, that they would get much deeper, those relationships.
Right.
Elizabeth just texted me back, thank you, and doing that really helps manage her anxiety. So, and we have a couple of questions submitted through our online program too that I want to just share,
Sure.
and I'll read them both and let you answer them.
Okay.
They're actually more like comments, but I think they raise questions. So, Catherine K says, "I appreciate in-care programs!" ! I wish, in hindsight, that someone had made me sit down early in seminary and plan my coursework with the MFC in mind. I sort of assumed things would get covered if I fulfilled my non-UU seminary's requirements. And then there's a second comment. Even here in Pennsylvania, the only program is in the very southeastern tip of the state, and the expense and logistics of even a weekend gathering is beyond daunting.
Boy, in terms of the first question, one of the realities when there are 72 seminaries that have at least one UU student, trying to sort of say this is the way it must be done for all is a fool's errand. I, to the extent possible, have as much conversation as I can with folks who are trying to think out how to plan their seminary experience. I don't actually have very many conversations about that. It's rare that people will touch base with me. And all I can try to do is just stress what the competencies that the fellowship committee expects and help people kind of navigate their way through it. You know, the RSCCs, even to a degree, were not they're not theological educations, so they may not be. Most of the people who served on them would not have been in a position to give people astute advice around how to handle their theological education, other than perhaps some broad areas. So in terms of the retreats in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure I can say much about that because I don't know how that works. One of the major impacts around the success of some of these in-care programs is how many UU seminarians are near each other to be able to find places that are, you know, cost-effective and so forth to stay.
Right.
It gets much more complicated when people are living far apart.
You know, one thing I just want to add about this, the scattered scattered seminarians going to non-UU seminaries, that trend is actually declining. Is what I've been told, that it's gone from 5 or 6 seminarians at a seminary down to 1 or 2, and Meadville is growing every year. The class grew by 7 students, full-time equivalents last year, and they're anticipating for next year that it'll be 10 additional full-time equivalents next year. So I guess there's some kind of consolidation happening.
You know, from year to year, it goes up and down. Some multi-denominational schools get really busy with UU students, and others just drop off. So there's kind of an ebb and flow.
David, what's your guess on if I was going to start seminary tomorrow, right? Do this whole thing over again.
Don't do it.
You don't have
to. How much money do you think it would cost me to get through the whole process? How much money should I plan, my family, how much money should I plan to have to spend to get through this process? Assuming that there's, you know, my tuition, I'm going to have to go to meetings. I probably need to go to GA a couple of times, at least a couple of times while I'm in seminary. I got the MFC. I got, you know, what's, you know, in round numbers, is this a $100,000 operation? Is this?
I think between 75 and 100, realistically, given the cost of tuition and the years that people spend. Actually, here's the difference. If you are able to stay where you are, the costs just become primarily related to the tuition. If you move your family across the country, then it can be extraordinarily expensive. And you know, to some degree, it depends on the seminary and whether or not people apply for financial aid from the UUA, which is a huge puzzlement to me. This is the lowest year in 15 years of people who've applied for money from the association.
Right.
Yeah, we have. Last year we had, I think, about 70. This year we have 46, and I have no idea why people choose not to apply. It's extraordinary to me.
How much money do you have to give up?
I'm trying to think of the raw number. It's between $170,000 and $200,000. And a change that came out of the strategic review of ministries that Peter Morales put together was talking with donors about how they wanted their scholarship money to be spent, and they gave a pretty clear answer that they were wanting the UUA to have larger scholarships for folks that had, you know, some evidence of being significantly meritorious. It wasn't about financial need, because everybody has financial need, and that's the way it had been for a while. So now the scholarships are significantly larger, $10,000 to $15,000, and one of them that runs up $25,000. So if you can think of a way to help people to say you need to apply every April 15th, that would be great.
I'd say actually it costs about, at minimum, $100,000 and more that you're going to spend, because you need that. You can't work, or it's very hard to work, and you need to support yourself and pay tuition and then travel. So
you're going to need $100,000 over and above keeping yourself alive in your family,
including
yourself alive. You know, all that stuff.
Let's just take a moment to
you know, I mean, I've always.
I was just going to acknowledge the spouses who have made it possible for so many people to go to seminary.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, David, it sounds like there is, you know, a lot of you're looking at a lot of different areas of how to help students, whether it's through the seminaries, through in-care. But to be blunt, I mean, there also should be responsibility on the student themselves, right? I mean, that's why I have occasionally heard, I don't know, kind of an entitled attitude from some students, and I realize I'm coming across as the, hey, I went through it the hard way, you can't do. But
you kids get out of my yard.
But hey, that's
kids these days.
I mean, I think that's such an important part about ministry is you have to learn how to ferret out the help and the guides and the teachers that you need, right?
Yes, and I think that I actually think the central goal of theological education in the Unitarian Universalist tradition is for people to be able to claim their ministerial authority because we don't have external sources. We don't have a clear God out there that we can all rely upon. We don't rely upon Scripture. We don't rely upon tradition. So part of the journey is to claim that sense of identity within yourself, and then to be clear what it is that you need and go ask for it. And I watch folks who struggle with, and this was my own experience, so I can speak to it, of being tentative about my own sense of call and my own authority and who am I to do this, and being a little hesitant at times to call my predecessor to say, I need the following, I'm struggling with this. So I think that when I meet people who have claimed that sense of gravity within themselves, it seems like they're able to make stronger decisions because they're taking responsibility for what they can take responsibility for. And there is the reality that we are a small movement. There's not a lot of money in debt reduction for people who get into preliminary fellowship. And part of the reality, given our culture, is that folks need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and not expect that the UUA is going to take care of them, in a sense. We hope to be your allies and supporters, but to sort of imagine in perhaps some of the ways that more conservative traditions take care of clergy, that's not been my personal experience. So being able to kind of ask for what you need, setting your own limits is really part of the long-standing learning that we all have to do to be able to function in this wonderful but mysterious profession.
Yeah, well, let's just take a moment. I mean, today's let's thank Wayne Arneson, let's thank the spouses, but I do just want to take a moment and say to those of you who are in the process how much support there really is there for you, how much those of us who are old and tired are rooting for your ministries to come along and pick up the vision where we are, where we can't see around the next corner, and how fun it is to watch your ministries unfold. So I think, we all share that here, and I just want to name it because I don't feel like we name that quite often enough. Other final words from people.
I will just say that when I look back on my, formation process, how much it seemed like that it was an evaluation process, that you go through this formation process and at the end you get to be a minister, and that the whole step along the way people are, the UUA is really looking at you, and then when you get on this side of it, it's like you realize that the evaluation piece is this really tiny slice of it, that more the attitude is what Meg is talking about. We're encouraging. We're like we want you all to succeed. We want you to be ministers. We need more ministers. We need more ministers. Yeah, it's a tough go in the sense that it's not always easy for a person to see how. I mean, as a minister, right? It's a difficult profession. That's the much more ruthless evaluator. Believe me, right? You can get through the MFC and never make a dime as a minister, right? That's the sad truth of the matter. But the market is out there. But the ministers who are in actually want you to succeed.
Yeah.
In almost every case. But
thanks, Tom. I'll say very quickly too. I appreciate the complexity that the UUA faces. Trying to do a very important job with limited resources, and the anxiety in the system has a lot to do with the fact that the financial burden of seminary and education has shifted to seminarians, and
Right.
people are looking at, I did an informal audit of my Meadville peers, and the average was 50 grand in student debt, which, by the way, student loan debt is 6% these days. So that means, assuming a 15-year payment plan, that's $5,000 a year that folks will be paying.
And you never can get rid of them, man. Those students
Right.
die and
So, but I appreciate, the way you, David, and Sarah are grappling with this, and the MFC, they put a lot of time in. So,
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
So thank you, David. You got last words for us?
Yeah, next week, not 2 weeks from now, I'm going to St. Louis with a whole bunch of UUs to be in a conversation about what that's being called the economies of ministry, looking at the realities of finance from the moment that people think about ministry to the day that they retire. So this is an important conversation we need to have as a large group of folks to begin to try to figure out and grapple with ways to address issues around significant debt. No question.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. That probably is at least as significant as this other part of formation, is the finances of it. Thanks a lot for being here, everybody. Next week, Kay Montgomery will be coming to talk about her new meditation manual on aging, one of whose authors, Tom Shade, is here with us today, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.